Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive right back into the story of Mark Davis, a young law student struggling to make ends meet. At 23 years old, Mark was juggling his final year at law school, a part-time job, and the mounting debts left by his late father. His life felt like a constant battle against time and money, with no way to catch a break. Every day was a blur, and the weight of his situation was almost unbearable. But Mark's life was about to take an unexpected turn. One rainy evening, as Mark trudged down the wet streets of the small college town, his phone buzzed in his pocket. It was an unknown number, but something told him he should pick up. He hesitated before answering. Mark Davis, a calm, authoritative voice greeted him. "This is Eleanor Brooks. I need to speak with you regarding your financial situation. Meet me at Brooks Bistro, 7 p.m. It's important." Mark frowned, confused. "I'm sorry, who are you? How do you know about my debts?" he asked, his voice laced with suspicion. Eleanor's voice remained cool and composed. "I know enough. I'll explain everything when we meet." Before Mark could protest, the call ended abruptly. Mark stood frozen for a moment, his mind racing. Who was this Eleanor Brooks, and what did she want with him? Despite his better judgment, Mark decided to go. He walked to the bistro, rain soaking through his jacket, unsure of what to expect. The bistro was warm, with the smell of fresh coffee and baked goods in the air, a stark contrast to the cold, wet streets outside. Mark entered, scanning the room for the woman who had called him. At a corner table sat Eleanor, an older woman in her late 60s, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that screamed wealth. She looked up as he approached, her piercing blue eyes meeting his with a knowing glance. "Mark," she said smoothly, her voice calm and unwavering. "Please, sit. I know about your situation. The debts left behind by your father, the struggles you've been facing. I'm here to offer you a solution." Mark hesitated before taking the seat across from her. "What do you mean? How can you help me?" he asked, still trying to piece together the mystery. Eleanor set down her cup of tea, her eyes locking onto his with an intensity that made him feel like he was under a microscope. "I need a husband, Mark. A companion. In exchange, I'll pay off all your debts, ensure your financial security, and take care of your future. This isn't about romance. It's a business arrangement. Marry me, and in return, I'll give you the chance to rebuild your life." Mark blinked, his mind struggling to process her words. A marriage proposal? From a woman he'd just met? But Eleanor was calm, her demeanor unwavering. He could see she was serious, but could he accept such an offer? He laughed, a bit nervously. "Are you serious? You don't even know me. Why would you want to marry me?" Eleanor leaned forward slightly, her voice steady but with a touch of sadness in it. "You're young, unattached, and desperate enough to consider this. You don't have love to offer, but I don't need love, Mark. I need someone to stand by me, someone to share my name and my legacy. It's that simple." Mark's mind raced. He was stuck in a situation he couldn't get out of, and this offer, no matter how strange, might be his only way out. The weight of his debts was a constant pressure on his chest, and the thought of finally being free from that burden was too tempting to ignore. But could he really marry a woman he didn't know, just for money? As he sat there, struggling with the decision, Eleanor added quietly, "I'm not asking for love, Mark. Just companionship. We'll keep things simple, no strings attached. Just a formal partnership. But the choice is yours. Take your time to think about it." Mark looked down at his hands, the decision weighing heavily on him. He could refuse. But what did he have to lose? His life was a mess, and this strange, unexpected offer might just be his ticket to a better future. With a deep breath, he finally spoke. "I'll do it," he said, his voice quiet but resolute. Eleanor's lips curled into a faint smile as she extended her hand toward him, sealing their unusual pact. The deal was made, but Mark's journey into this strange new life was just beginning. What would this partnership lead to? Would Mark find a new purpose in his life, or would he regret this decision? Stay tuned as the unexpected twists of this unusual marriage unfold. Remember, if you want to see more of Mark and Eleanor's story, hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new chapter. See you in the next part. Mark sat at the small, dimly lit bistro table, still reeling from Eleanor's offer. It felt surreal, like something straight out of a storybook. She had just asked him to marry her for a business deal. The weight of her words hung in the air, pressing down on him. He had no idea what to make of it. How could anyone? He barely knew her, yet here she was, offering him a lifeline from the debts that had been suffocating him. He glanced down at the contract she'd slid across the table, the fine print blurring in his mind. His heart pounded in his chest as he stared at her. Eleanor Brooks, the woman with the power to change his life in the blink of an eye. "I know this might sound crazy," Eleanor's voice broke through his thoughts, calm as ever, "but you don't have many options, Mark. You don't have to love me. All I need is someone to stand by me. A companion, someone to share my life with, for business purposes. I know it's unusual, but I've been alone for far too long, and I can't do this on my own anymore. You don't need to worry about love. It's not necessary for this arrangement." Mark swallowed hard. It wasn't about love, he knew that. But even so, it felt wrong. A marriage, even if fake, wasn't something you could just sign up for without thinking. And yet, here he was, a young man desperate for a way out of his mounting debt, a way to save his family. The more he thought about it, the more the idea seemed to make sense. The marriage, the money, the security, all of it would give him the freedom to rebuild his life. But could he really do it? Could he marry a woman he didn't know, for the sake of money? He looked at Eleanor, who was waiting patiently for his answer, her face calm and unreadable. I don't know," Mark said, his voice barely a whisper. "It's a big decision." Eleanor didn't flinch. She had been through this before. She knew what it took to make a deal. "Take your time," she said softly. "But remember, this could change everything for you. It's your chance to live a life free of worries, a chance to start fresh." She pushed the contract toward him again, a silent invitation. Mark hesitated for a moment longer. He thought about his mother, her face drawn with worry over the mounting bills. He thought about his little sister, whose tuition was still unpaid. He thought about the sleepless nights he had spent worrying about how he was going to keep a roof over their heads. Finally, he made up his mind. He reached out and took the pen. "I'll do it," he said, his voice steady but uncertain. "I'll marry you. For the arrangement." Her lips curved into a faint smile, and she extended her hand across the table. "Good," she said, shaking his hand firmly. "I'm glad you've made the right choice. Let's start making the arrangements." The days that followed were a blur. Mark moved into Eleanor's lavish estate, a mansion that seemed more like a museum than a home. The staff were kind but distant, and Eleanor was every bit the picture of grace and power. She gave him a tour of the mansion, showed him his new rooms, and explained the rules of their arrangement. They would live as husband and wife, but there would be no intimacy, no real connection beyond the basic business of sharing a name. It seemed simple enough. But as the days went by, Mark found himself struggling with the coldness of it all. One night, after a particularly exhausting day of learning the ropes of being a husband in name only, Mark sat in the study, flipping through a book on corporate law that Eleanor had recommended. He was trying to focus, but his thoughts kept drifting to the life he had left behind. It wasn't just the poverty that had haunted him, it was the constant feeling of being trapped, of not knowing where the next meal was coming from or how long he could keep the bills paid. He missed the simplicity of his old life, even if it had been a struggle. He looked up as Eleanor walked into the study, her footsteps light on the polished hardwood floor. She was wearing a simple black dress, her hair pulled back into a neat bun. Her presence was commanding, but tonight, there was something different in the air. A slight softness, perhaps a hint of vulnerability that Mark hadn't noticed before. "How are you settling in?" she asked, her tone gentle. Mark nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. "It's a lot to take in," he admitted. "I never imagined I'd be in a situation like this." Eleanor smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I know this isn't easy for you. It wasn't easy for me, either. But we'll get through it." She paused, as if gathering her thoughts. "I'm not asking you to fall in love with me, Mark. I just need someone to be there. Someone who will stand by me when everything else feels empty." Her words hit him harder than he expected. He hadn't realized how lonely she must have been, how much she needed someone, even if it wasn't love. He'd never understood that kind of loneliness before. But now, he was starting to. He realized that despite the wealth, the status, and the power she held, Eleanor was just as human as he was. For the first time since entering the mansion, Mark found himself seeing Eleanor not as a businesswoman or a stranger, but as a woman who had been hurt, who had lived through her own struggles. And for the first time, he felt a spark of something more than obligation. Mark cleared his throat, setting the book aside. "I'll be here," he said, more to himself than to her. "I'll stick with this. For both of us." Eleanor nodded, the faintest trace of relief washing over her face. "Thank you, Mark." As they both stood in the study, the weight of their arrangement settling between them, Mark couldn't help but wonder if, somewhere in this strange new world, there was the possibility of something more than just a contract. Something real. What would happen next? Could two people, bound by a business arrangement, ever find real love? Stay tuned to find out. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next part of Mark and Eleanor's story. See you in the next chapter. As the days turned into weeks, Mark began to settle into his new life in Eleanor's mansion. It wasn't the life he had imagined for himself, but it wasn't terrible either. The grand estate had every luxury he could have dreamed of: beautiful gardens, a vast library, and rooms decorated with priceless art. But despite all of this, Mark still couldn't shake the feeling of emptiness. He lived in a world of opulence, yet he felt disconnected from everything. Eleanor was always busy with her foundation and corporate dealings, and he was left to fill his days with whatever he could find. They rarely saw each other outside of their scheduled dinners and the occasional business meeting. The arrangement was exactly what they had agreed upon: a marriage in name only, no strings attached. But something started to change. As time passed, Mark found himself thinking about Eleanor more and more. He began to notice the small things about her: how she always carried herself with such grace, how her laughter, though rare, was infectious when it came. He started seeing a side of her that wasn't the tough businesswoman who made deals in boardrooms. He saw the woman who, despite all her wealth, was still searching for something more, someone to truly connect with. And for the first time, Mark began to wonder if there could be something more between them. Was it possible that he was starting to care for her? Was it just the loneliness of the mansion, or was he genuinely beginning to fall for her? One evening, after dinner, Mark found himself alone in the garden, his thoughts racing. He had been walking the path through the rose bushes, trying to clear his head when Eleanor stepped outside, her figure illuminated by the soft glow of the moon. She had been looking for him. He had noticed that she had been more distant lately, lost in her thoughts. There was something different about her that night, something that felt fragile. "Mark," Eleanor called softly, her voice cutting through the quiet of the evening. "I need to talk to you." Mark turned, his heart skipping a beat as she approached him. The cool breeze tousled her hair, and for a moment, she looked every bit the woman who had built her empire alone. But there was something else there, something vulnerable in her eyes that Mark hadn't seen before. "What's wrong?" Mark asked, his concern growing. He stepped closer, his voice softer than usual. Eleanor hesitated, looking down at her hands for a moment before meeting his gaze. I don't want to do this anymore, she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. The arrangement. The pretending. It's harder than I thought it would be. Mark's chest tightened at her words. He had suspected something was off, but hearing her say it out loud made it all feel real. He took a step forward, his hand instinctively reaching for hers. Eleanor, he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion, we don't have to keep pretending. If you want to change the terms, we can. Eleanor shook her head, her eyes glistening with something Mark couldn't quite place. It's not just about the terms, Mark, she said, her voice breaking slightly. I thought I could handle this living this way, being alone even when there are people around me. But I can't. I don't want to live like this anymore. Mark felt a surge of compassion for her. He had always seen her as this unshakable, powerful woman, but now, seeing her like this vulnerable, Ra realized just how much she had been holding back. She had been living a life of solitude, surrounded by wealth but devoid of real connection. I get it, he said softly, I really do. You don't have to go through this alone, Eleanor. I'm here. If this arrangement isn't what you want anymore, we can figure something out together. For a long moment, Eleanor didn't say anything. She simply looked at him, her eyes searching his face, as though trying to gauge if he meant what he said. Then, finally, she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. Do you mean it? She asked. Do you really want to help me, or is this just part of the deal? Mark took her hand in his grip firm but gentle. I mean it, he said, his voice filled with sincerity. I may have agreed to this deal, but I never signed up to see you miserable. If you want something more, we can find it together. No more pretending. No more playing roles. I'm here, Eleanor. And I care about you. For the first time in their arrangement, Eleanor smiled a real smile, one that reached her eyes. Mark felt a warmth spread through him, something he hadn't realized he had been missing. Maybe this marriage, this arrangement, was the beginning of something real after all. Maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to heal together. The next few days were filled with conversations, long talks about their pasts, their dreams, and what they truly wanted from life. It wasn't easy. There were still moments of hesitation, moments when the walls between them seemed too high to climb. But little by little, they began to tear them down. And as the weeks passed, Mark found himself seeing Eleanor in a new light. The woman who had once been a distant, calculating businesswoman was now someone he was beginning to truly care about. The arrangement had turned into something more, something neither of them had expected, but both of them were beginning to hope for. What would happen next? Would their new connection lead to something deeper? Or would their pasts come back to haunt them? Stay tuned to find out. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next part of Mark and Eleanor's journey. See you in the next chapter. Weeks passed, and what had once started as a business arrangement between Mark and Eleanor was slowly transforming into something neither of them had expected. They spent more time together, having deep conversations about their lives, their fears, and their hopes for the future. Mark was no longer just the man who signed a contract to pay off his debt. She was becoming someone Eleanor could rely on. And Eleanor, in turn, wasn't the intimidating, cold businesswoman anymore. She was opening up in ways that Mark hadn't thought possible, sharing her vulnerabilities, her struggles, and even her loneliness. One afternoon, after a long day of meetings for Eleanor, she and Mark sat in the garden, the setting sun casting long shadows over the perfectly manicured lawn. They had grown accustomed to this routine. Mark would take a walk around the property, and Eleanor would join him when she could. There was something peaceful about the quiet moments they spent together, something that allowed them to be more than just husband and wife on paper. It was a space where they could both let their guard down. I've been thinking, Eleanor said as they sat on the stone bench, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing the edge of her teacup. About what you said the other night. About no more pretending. I think you're right. We've been living this life of convenience, but it's not what either of us truly wants. Mark turned to her, his heart suddenly racing. Her words felt like an opening, an invitation to explore something deeper. Eleanor, he said softly, we've both been pretending for so long. But what if we stopped? What if we took a step back and allowed ourselves to be real, with each other? Eleanor looked at him, her eyes thoughtful, but there was a flicker of something hope, maybe that Mark had never seen before. She reached out and placed her hand on his, a simple gesture that spoke volumes. I don't know what this is, Mark, she admitted. I don't know where it's going, but I can't help but wonder if this could be the start of something real. Something beyond the contract, beyond the arrangement. Mark felt a knot in his stomach. The weight of her words hit him in a way he hadn't expected. He had come into this with so many doubts, so many walls built around his heart. But now, with her hand in his, he couldn't ignore the truth any longer. He had started to care about her, more than he had ever planned to. And what scared him the most was the possibility of losing that. He leaned closer, his voice barely above a whisper. I think I've been starting to feel the same way, he confessed. I didn't want to, but the more time we spend together, the more I realize that what we have, it's not just business. There's something more. Something I didn't expect to find. Eleanor's breath caught, and for a moment, she seemed unsure. But then she smiled, a soft, genuine smile that made Mark's heart skip a beat. I never thought I'd find this, she said, her voice barely audible. Not in a million years. But here we are. Mark's hand tightened around hers, a sense of clarity washing over him. He knew this wasn't going to be easy. There would be obstacles, challenges, and doubts. But for the first time, he felt like they were on the same page, like they were building something that was truly their own. The next few days brought more conversations about their futures, about what they wanted out of life, and what it meant to be a family, even if it wasn't a traditional one. Eleanor opened up about the loss of her family, her struggles with loneliness, and her fear of not being truly loved for who she was, not just what she had built. Mark listened, offering his support and reassurance, and in doing so, he found himself growing closer to her in ways he hadn't anticipated. But just as things seemed to be progressing, the first real test of their relationship came in the form of an unexpected phone call. Eleanor's lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Claire, had called to inform her of some legal developments regarding the contract. Mark overheard Eleanor on the phone as she tried to calm Claire down. What do you mean the contract is being questioned? Eleanor's voice was sharp, her usual composure cracking. This was supposed to be a sealed deal. Mark felt a sudden sense of unease. He had been enjoying the moments with Eleanor, but now, the shadow of their business arrangement was creeping back into the picture. He stood up, walking toward Eleanor as she ended the call, looking shaken. What's going on? He asked, his voice steady but concerned. Eleanor turned to face him, her expression tight with frustration. The contract we signed, it's under review. There's a clause that someone is trying to use against us, claiming that our arrangement wasn't legitimate. I don't know what's going to happen next. Mark's stomach dropped. He had known this was too good to be true. They had started to get too comfortable, to believe in something real. And now, just as things were getting better, it felt like it was all slipping away. But Eleanor looked at him, determination flashing in her eyes. We'll handle this, she said, her voice firm. We've been through worse. And I won't let this tear us apart. Mark nodded, taking a deep breath. Whatever came next, he knew they would face it together. And maybe, just maybe, this was the test they needed to prove that what they had wasn't just a contract, but something worth fighting for. Stay tuned to find out what happens next. Will Eleanor and Mark's bond survive the challenges ahead? Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell to keep up with their journey. See you in the next chapter. The days that followed were filled with uncertainty. Mark and Eleanor had decided to face the looming legal challenge head-on, but the weight of the situation hung over them like a dark cloud. Eleanor was her usual composed self, dealing with the legalities of the contract, but Mark could see the strain beneath her calm exterior. There were moments when she would stare off into space, lost in thought, and he could tell that this was more than just a business deal for her. She had invested herself emotionally, even if she had never admitted it. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Mark and Eleanor sat in the study, papers scattered in front of them. They had just finished reviewing some legal documents, trying to make sense of the contract that had caused so much trouble. The air between them was thick with tension, but there was also something else, something unspoken. Mark could feel the shift between them, the way their interactions had evolved from cold formality to something warmer, more personal. But despite the growing connection, the reality of the situation couldn't be ignored. "I don't know if I can handle this much longer," Eleanor admitted, her voice quiet as she looked down at the papers in front of her. "I've built everything from the ground up. My business, my life. And now, it feels like it's all falling apart." She paused, a fragile vulnerability in her eyes that Mark had never seen before. "I don't know if I can keep pretending everything is fine, especially now that I'm starting to care about you." Mark's heart skipped a beat at her words. For the first time, it wasn't just about the arrangement or the contract. It was about them, about the real connection that had grown between them. He had spent so many nights wondering if he was just a pawn in her plan, but now, hearing her say that, he knew they were both in this together. He reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "Eleanor, we've come this far together," he said softly. "Whatever happens, I'm here for you. We'll face it together, no matter what. And maybe, just maybe, we can build something real, something that's ours." Eleanor looked at him, her hand resting in his, her expression a mix of disbelief and hope. "Do you really mean that?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Mark nodded, his grip tightening around her hand. "Yes, I do. This isn't just a business deal anymore. It's more than that. You've been there for me when I didn't expect it, and now, I want to be there for you." There was a long silence between them, and for a moment, it felt like the world outside the study had stopped. Then, Eleanor squeezed his hand, her eyes softening. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I've never had anyone like you before." As they sat there, the enormity of their situation weighed heavily on them. The contract, the looming legal battle, and the uncertainty of what the future held, everything felt like it could crumble at any moment. But despite the chaos, Mark knew one thing for sure: he couldn't imagine facing it without Eleanor by his side. The next morning, as they prepared for the meeting with their lawyers, Eleanor seemed more focused, more determined. Mark could see the fire in her eyes, the same fire that had driven her to build her empire, the same fire that now burned for something more than just business. "We're going to make this work," she said, her voice firm as she looked at Mark. "I've been fighting for everything my whole life. I'm not going to let this one thing, this contract, destroy everything we've worked for." She paused, turning to face him. "I'm glad you're with me, Mark. I'm not sure what would have happened if you weren't." Mark felt a surge of emotion at her words. He had come into this arrangement thinking it was just a way to solve his financial problems, but now, it was so much more. He wasn't just fighting for his own future anymore, was fighting for theirs. As they left the study and headed to the meeting, Mark couldn't help but think about how far they had come. From two strangers bound by a contract to something more, something that was beginning to feel like real love. It wasn't perfect, and there were still challenges ahead, but Mark was ready. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. They arrived at the lawyer's office, where the legal battle was about to unfold. Eleanor was calm and collected as always, but Mark could sense her underlying tension. He stayed close to her, offering his support in quiet, reassuring ways. They both knew that the outcome of this meeting could change everything. But as they walked into the conference room, Mark felt more certain than ever that, whatever happened, they would face it together. What will the next chapter bring for Mark and Eleanor? Will they overcome the legal challenges and finally find happiness together? Stay tuned to find out. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next part of Mark and Eleanor's journey. See you in the next chapter. The meeting with the lawyers was a tense one. Eleanor sat at the head of the large conference table, her posture impeccable as always, but there was a slight nervousness in the way she gripped the edge of the table. Mark sat beside her, trying to stay calm, but the weight of the situation was starting to sink in. They had been through so much already, but this meeting could determine the future of their entire arrangement and possibly their relationship. Eleanor had been dealing with the legal issues surrounding the contract for weeks, but now, it was all coming to a head. As the lawyers explained the legal complications with the contract, Mark could see Eleanor's sharp mind at work. She listened intently, asking pointed questions and demanding clarity on every point. But Mark could also see the strain in her eyes. She was tired of the constant battles, tired of the way her life had been dominated by business deals and contracts. He wanted to reach out, to comfort her, but he wasn't sure how. For so long, their relationship had been based on the foundation of a business deal, but now, he knew there was something more between them, something that couldn't be defined by legal terms or contracts. After a long and exhausting session, Eleanor stood up, her face pale from the stress. "We need to take a break," she said, her voice steady but clearly worn. "I need some air." Mark followed her outside, his concern growing. He knew how hard this had been on her, and the last thing he wanted was for her to carry this burden alone. They walked through the lush gardens of the estate, the warm breeze brushing against their faces. Eleanor was quiet, lost in thought, and Mark didn't push her to talk. He just walked beside her, offering his presence as a silent support. After a few moments, Eleanor finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how much more of this I can take, Mark," she said, her words heavy with exhaustion. "I've fought my whole life to build something, and now it feels like it's all slipping away. I don't know if I can keep going like this." Mark stopped walking and turned to her, his heart aching at the vulnerability in her voice. He reached for her hand, gently pulling her to face him. "Eleanor," he said softly, "you don't have to do this alone. I'm here. We're in this together. And no matter what happens, I will stand by you." Her eyes met his, and for a moment, it felt like time stood still. The tension, the uncertainty had all melted away, replaced by a quiet understanding. Eleanor smiled, a small but genuine smile that made Mark's heart swell with emotion. "Thank you, Mark," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "I don't think I realized how much I needed someone to say that." Mark squeezed her hand, feeling a rush of affection for her. It wasn't just about the contract anymore. It wasn't about the business arrangement they had entered into. It was about them, about the connection that had formed between them. They had started out as strangers, bound by a legal document, but now, they were something more. As they continued to walk, Mark knew that whatever happened next, they would face it together. The road ahead was uncertain, and the legal battle wasn't over yet, but he felt a newfound sense of hope. Eleanor had become more than just a business partner to him. She had become someone he truly cared about. And for the first time, he believed that they could build something real together, something beyond the contract, beyond the arrangement. Later that evening, as they sat down for a quiet dinner together, Eleanor was more relaxed, the weight of the day's events lifting slightly. They spoke about lighter topics, how the garden was blooming beautifully this time of year, and the new art pieces Eleanor had bought for the estate. It wasn't much, but it was a welcome break from the stress of the legal battle. As they finished dinner, Eleanor turned to him, a thoughtful expression on her face. "Mark," she said, her voice serious but warm, "I know things have been hard. But I want you to know that I appreciate you. More than I can say. I never thought I'd be in this situation, but having you by my side, it's made all the difference." Mark smiled, his heart swelling with emotion. "I'm glad I'm here, Eleanor. I've learned so much from you, about strength, about resilience. And I think I'm finally starting to see that the life I've been living, the life I've been running from, it's all been leading me to this moment, to this." He gestured between them, a soft but meaningful movement. "And I want to be here, for you, for us. Whatever that means." Eleanor's eyes softened, and for a moment, there was a quiet understanding between them. It wasn't perfect, and they still had a long way to go, but in that moment, it didn't matter. They had come this far together, and that was enough. Stay tuned to see what happens next in Mark and Eleanor's journey. Will they overcome the legal hurdles and finally be free of the contract? Will they find true happiness together? Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new chapter. See you in the next part. The next few days felt like a whirlwind. Mark and Eleanor had grown closer, but the looming legal battle was still weighing heavily on both of them. Despite their newfound connection, they couldn't ignore the fact that the contract was still in question, and the future of their arrangement hung in the balance. Eleanor had been more distant recently, her mind clearly preoccupied with the legal issues, and Mark found himself picking up on her anxiety. He knew it was only a matter of time before they had to face the reality of the situation. One evening, as the sun set over the estate, Eleanor invited Mark to join her for a quiet dinner on the patio. The soft glow of the lanterns cast a warm light over the table, and the air was cool but pleasant. They sat in silence for a few moments, the weight of the past days pressing down on both of them. Finally, Eleanor spoke, her voice soft but tinged with frustration. "I just can't keep doing this, Mark," she admitted, her eyes looking down at her plate. "The legal battles, the constant stress, it's taking a toll on me. I thought I could handle it, but I'm starting to wonder if it's worth it anymore." Mark reached across the table, gently taking her hand in his. "Eleanor," he said softly, his voice filled with reassurance, "I know this is hard, but we're in this together. We've come this far. We don't have to face it alone. I'm not going anywhere." She looked at him, her eyes softening. There was a vulnerability in her gaze that Mark had never seen before, and it made his heart ache. He knew how much this meant to her: the work, the business, the foundation she had built. It was everything she had fought for, and now, it seemed like it was all slipping away. "I don't know if I can keep pretending this is just business," Eleanor continued, her voice shaky. "The truth is, I've started to care about you. More than I ever expected. And now, I'm scared. Scared of losing everything. Scared of losing you." Mark's chest tightened at her words. He had never expected to find himself in this position, to be in a relationship that was supposed to be fake but had turned into something real. He had his own fears too: fear of not being enough, fear of their arrangement falling apart. But looking at Eleanor, he knew that he couldn't turn back now. He squeezed her hand, his voice steady as he spoke. "Eleanor, we don't have to lose each other. No matter what happens with the contract, no matter what the future holds, I'm here. And I'm not going anywhere. We'll face whatever comes next together." Eleanor smiled faintly, the weight of her worries easing just slightly. "Thank you, Mark," she whispered, her voice filled with emotion. "I never thought I'd find someone like you. You've been my strength when I had none left." The tension between them seemed to melt away, and for the first time in weeks, Eleanor seemed at peace. The future was still uncertain, but in that moment, they had each other, and that was enough. As the evening drew to a close, Mark and Eleanor stood up from the table, their hands still intertwined. They walked back toward the house together, their steps in sync. There was a quiet understanding between them now, a sense of solidarity that hadn't been there before. Mark knew there were still challenges ahead. The legal issues, the uncertainties about their future, and the lingering doubts about their arrangement all loomed over them. But in that moment, he was confident that together, they could face anything. As they reached the door, Eleanor stopped for a moment, turning to Mark with a look of gratitude in her eyes. "I don't know what the future holds," she said quietly, "but I'm glad I don't have to face it alone." Mark smiled, his heart swelling with affection. "Neither do I," he replied. What happens next for Eleanor and Mark? Will they be able to overcome the legal challenges, or will their growing bond be tested once again? Stay tuned to find out. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next chapter of Eleanor and Mark's journey. See you in the next part. The days following their conversation were filled with a mix of tension and hope. Mark and Eleanor had reached a new understanding, but the looming legal battle was far from over. Eleanor had always been strong, but the cracks were beginning to show, and Mark could feel the weight of it. He could tell she was trying to keep it together, but the strain of the situation was getting to her. And while their relationship had grown stronger, the pressure was beginning to build on both of them. One afternoon, Eleanor called a meeting with her lawyer, Claire, to discuss the status of the contract. Mark joined her in the large conference room, both of them feeling the tension in the air. The legal team had been working around the clock, but they still hadn't found a solution. Claire spoke up, her tone professional but with an underlying sense of concern. "Eleanor," she began, "we've done everything we can, but the other side is pushing hard. The contract is being challenged more seriously now. We may need to consider alternate strategies. Time is running out, and we need to act fast." Eleanor's face tightened, but she didn't flinch. Mark watched her, his heart aching for her. She had been so strong through all of this, but now, he could see the fear in her eyes. It was a fear he shared. They both knew what was at stake, and no matter how hard they tried, the situation was beyond their control. "What do you suggest we do?" Eleanor asked, her voice steady despite the anxiety in her expression. Claire hesitated for a moment before responding. "We may need to negotiate with the other party, make some compromises. This may be the only way to protect your interests." Mark felt the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He could see the determination in Eleanor's eyes, but he also saw the exhaustion. This battle wasn't just about the contract, it was about everything she had built. And he knew that whatever the outcome, it would change their lives forever. After the meeting, Eleanor and Mark found themselves walking through the estate's garden once again. The air was thick with the unspoken words between them, both of them lost in their thoughts. "I don't know if I can keep doing this, Mark," Eleanor said softly, breaking the silence. "I've put everything into this. My business, my life, it feels like it's all slipping away, no matter what I do." Mark stopped and turned to face her, his voice full of conviction. "Eleanor, you're not alone in this. We've come so far together. Whatever happens next, I'm here. We'll face it together." She looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude and fear. "I don't know what I would do without you, Mark," she said quietly. "This has all been so much more than I ever expected. I thought I was strong enough to handle it on my own, but I can't. I'm scared." Mark stepped closer, his hand gently touching hers. "You don't have to be strong alone, Eleanor. I'm here, and together, we can figure this out." Eleanor's eyes softened, and for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to lean into his support. She didn't have to carry the weight of the world alone. And in that moment, Mark realized something. This wasn't just about the contract or the business, it was about them, and the life they were building together. They had started this journey as strangers, bound by a contract, but now, they were more than that. They were partners. Later that evening, as they sat down to dinner, Mark and Eleanor spoke about the future. Not the legal battles, not the challenges, but their hopes, their dreams. They talked about what they wanted for themselves, what kind of life they could create, together. It was a conversation they had never really had before, and it was one that made both of them realize that their bond was stronger than any contract or obstacle. Mark looked at Eleanor, his heart full. "I know things are tough right now, but we have each other. And that's what matters. We'll find a way through this." Eleanor smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. "Thank you, Mark. I'm starting to believe that, too." As they finished their meal and continued to talk, Mark felt a sense of peace he hadn't felt in a long time. The future was still uncertain, and they still had challenges ahead, but for the first time, he believed that they could face whatever came next, as a team. Stay tuned to find out what happens next. Will Eleanor and Mark overcome the final obstacles in their journey? Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new chapter. See you in the next part. Weeks passed, and the legal battle that had once seemed all-consuming finally began to subside. Eleanor and Mark had spent so many sleepless nights worrying about the outcome, but now, there was a glimmer of hope on the horizon. After multiple rounds of negotiation, the contract was finally secured, the challenges cleared, and the agreement solidified. Mark could see the relief on Eleanor's face as the weight of the battle was lifted. But for both of them, something had changed in the process. The journey they had been on together, fraught with tension, uncertainty, and moments of doubt, had brought them closer than they could have imagined. One evening, after the dust had settled, they sat together in the garden once again, the soft hum of crickets filling the air. It was a calm evening, the kind they hadn't shared in months. The weight of their past struggles seemed to fade into the background, and for the first time, they could just be present with each other. Eleanor smiled softly as she looked out at the horizon, her voice filled with quiet contentment. "It feels strange, doesn't it?" she said. "To finally be able to breathe, to not have the constant pressure hanging over us." Mark looked at her, his heart swelling with affection. "It does," he replied. "But it also feels like we've come out of this stronger. I've never felt closer to you." He reached for her hand, holding it gently in his. The connection between them, once born from an arrangement, had evolved into something far deeper, something real. They had been through so much together, and now, they had found peace in one another's presence. Eleanor looked at him, her eyes softening. "I never imagined this when we first started this crazy journey," she admitted. "I thought this would just be about getting through the business, fulfilling a contract. But now I see that what we've built is so much more than I could have ever imagined." Mark smiled, squeezing her hand. "I've learned more about myself in the last few months than I ever did in all the years before. You've taught me what it means to really live, to be present, and to love without hesitation." There was a moment of silence between them, and then Eleanor leaned in, resting her head on his shoulder. Mark wrapped his arm around her, holding her close as they watched the sun set together. "You know," Eleanor said after a while, her voice soft, "I think we've both been looking for something simian without even realizing it. I never thought I needed someone to share my life with, but now that I have you, I can't imagine going back." Mark's heart skipped a beat. He looked down at her, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I feel the same way," he said quietly. "I never thought I'd find someone like you. But here we are." They both sat in silence for a moment, allowing the calm to settle in, the weight of everything they had overcome finally sinking in. It wasn't perfect, but they had found something beautiful together, something worth fighting for. As the evening wore on, Mark stood up and held out his hand to Eleanor. "There's something I want to ask you," he said, his voice filled with quiet anticipation. Eleanor looked up at him, her heart racing as she took his hand. "What is it?" she asked. Mark smiled, his heart full as he dropped to one knee. "Eleanor, I don't need to wait any longer. I don't want to wait any longer. Will you marry me for real this time? Not for a contract, but because I want to spend the rest of my life with you." Eleanor gasped, her eyes filling with tears as she looked down at him, speechless for a moment. Then, with a smile that lit up her entire face, she nodded, her voice filled with emotion. "Yes, Mark. Yes, I'll marry you." The world seemed to pause as they embraced, the future finally feeling as clear and full of promise as the sunset before them. Their journey had started with a contract, but now, it was leading them to something far more beautiful: love, commitment, and a life they would share together. Thank you for joining us on this journey with Eleanor and Mark. Their story is just beginning. If you enjoyed this chapter, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next part of their incredible journey. See you soon in the next chapter.